to do it again. Cool. We are going to be doing the forms and basic association labs. I'm going to close all these bad boys. Bloop, 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 bloop. Cool. Did everyone get through this? Cool. So let me make sure. Gideon also got through this lab. Cool. So basically, we're trying to, for this lab, we have this relationship, right? We have an artist, song, genre, note. It looks like loop, loop. Artist, song, genre, note. An artist has many songs. Genre has many songs. And a song has many notes. We all see that? Cool. I just find it useful to always diagram these out, make sure that I know what's going on. I'm going to clear at this point. You all heard this meeting is being recorded, right? Yes, cool. It totally is. So at this point, basically the first thing I'm going to do, sorry, I'm just putting on Do Not Disturb. It's already on. We've got to set up the relationships, obviously. But like I've read this README before. Definitely, this is a good time to double check this README. But I'm just like going to start running my migrations. First, I should check out a new branch. So git branch. I'm currently on master. I don't want to push up to master again just because I would like to keep a blank version of this. Git checkout -b pod solution. I'm creating a new branch called pod solution. I'm gonna do like a git status, git add dot, git commit first commit on branch. And so at this point on my local machine, I now have a new branch. It has not been sent up to the master branch, or it has not been set up to the to github.com. So I do git push at this point, and it's going to give me an error saying, hey, you don't have this branch yet. So I'm going to say, hey, push to origin this new branch called pod solution.
Hey, Nikki, I have a dumb question. What does it mean to have a new branch? Is it like a new folder?
It's like a new version of the like, okay, let me actually just show you on GitHub. Cool. Let's do, what are we on? Forms and basic. So I have this this master branch, which is just the clean branch. And then I now have this pod solution branch, which is another version of my code, right? That like has the differences on the branch. So like usually one of the most crucial things about GitHub, about the GitHub like development flow, basically whenever you want to make an addition to an app, right? So if I said that I wanted like on this huge production level database, I want to add this one feature. Usually the way that developers do it is you check out a new branch. You like off of master, you code it till this new feature works. You run all the tests, make sure that, hey, this version is the new version of like of the app that I want to make the master version, right? So at this point, let's say that I wanted to make it so that the master version of this code, currently there's not much of a difference. I'm gonna I'm going to like go into this README file real quick, and I'm going to say, San Dimas High School football rules, right? Just so that that can be on master. And at this point, right now, I'm on the pod solution branch, right? So I'm going to do git add. I'm going to like start committing this. Great. I'm going to git push, and this pushes it up to my remote branch called pod solution, right? So now if you take a look at my GitHub repo, I'm going to like refresh this real quick. You'll now see that the pod solution branch, if I go down to the README, says San Dimas High School football rules. And that's something that I now have on this branch. But this is just my specific branch. I've made this branch of pod solution, right? The master branch, if I switch back to master, it still doesn't have any of these changes. And this is a good thing, right? This is me saying, hey, I have a remote branch that I think like that eventually I hope to become the new master, right? But right now it's like my own separate branch. When I think I'm ready with this code, when I'm comfortable with this code being the new master, what I would do is I would then create a pull request, right? That basically says, hey, I want to add this new feature, San Dimas High School football rules, to master, right? And so I'm going to like create this little pull request being like, I added a Bill and Ted reference. Cool. I'm going to create the pull request. And now basically in this case, like depending on like how you like then process this, right? If you're like working in a production level app, or if you're like working on an open source project, usually there would be some sort of reviewer, right? And like you could add a reviewer, like I could add Maxwell Benton to like and ask him to review this. And then they can usually be like, hey, I actually really like this pull request. I think it does a better thing for this app now that it like says San Dimas High School football rules. So at this point, they would be able to, or if this were like a loose like startup type app, I would be able to, if I'm just like, yeah, it passes the test, I don't need someone else to review this. I'm going to be able to merge this pull request, or confirm this merge, and now my new master branch. Oh shit, did I merge this into LearnCo students? Cool, I'm going to have to edit LearnCo students briefly because, but now we all just now all students looking at this lab will see San Dimas High School football rules. And I'm going to just edit this on master. Whoops. Fix that. And we're going to learn something.
At least we got to see it actually works. That's really cool. Like, I think I was asking you how this works yesterday. I'm super excited right now. So yes.
Cool. I'm going to refrain from doing that again. I forgot that I was not merging to my local fork of it. I was actually merging to the master branch. But we learned something, right? And that is how GitHub works. Create a fork, create a branch, merge it into master, and then that becomes the new version of the app that everyone else can then, like if I were on someone else's computer now and I had like local edits, right? One thing I can do is if I'm on master, I'm not going to show you this because I'm not going to go back and mess with LearnCo students again. I can then type in git pull, and if like its changes can be merged with my changes safely without editing code, suddenly by writing git pull, my local master gets all of the remote code from this new pull request, right? So this new master becomes our master, and doing git pull makes it catch up with us. And so that's how GitHub works.
What happens if you try to like edit the same line of code both at the same time? Is that a thing?
Yeah. At that point, basically, when you push back up or when you pull down, like like GitHub will try its best to merge your code, but oftentimes there will be something called a merge conflict, and then GitHub offers like several ways to like get around that. So like basically you can go into the GUI of github.com and be like, hey, I'm trying to push this, and it's gonna be like, whoa, 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 there's conflicts. Do you want this line of code or do you want this line of code? Do you want this line of code or do you want this line of code? And that's why GitHub is powerful.
That's very, very cool. Like you have no idea how many times we overrode each other's contracts in real life. Like,
Yeah. So we just did GitHub. We messed with Learn CoMaster. We're we have fun here. I should also introduce you to Kanye.rest is a great tool for making the worst GitHub commits. It basically all it does is if you do like a get to this, you can like you get a random Kanye quote, and they suggest one of the uses case for this is to go to like your bash profile and make it so that when you type git YOLO, it runs a curl request to the Kanye West API or Kanye.rest API and gives you a random Kanye quote. So just to show you what that's, so I'm going to run IRB. And one of the easier ways to like do an HTTP request in IRB or in Ruby is just to use these backticks. So it says, believe in your fineness, conquer your shyness. Just by running this, it like went over to api.kanye.rest and gave us this this like new quote. And if you like put that in, like, and if you string interpolate that into your git commit message, you can just have Kanye quotes as your git commit messages and never be hireable. But my like one of my former instructors, who's like kind of a mentor in terms of teaching, he basically the entirety of learn.co is covered with git commit messages from him that are just bad boys pushed to master, which means not using a branch, just pushing to master directly and risking breaking all the code. So cool, you just learned a lot about GitHub. We can dive into this thing now. I wish I like had a way to like flag to the video like, hey, here's a good point to tune in if you just want to learn about this this lab. But if you see this, it's a good time to tune in. Great. Trying our best here.
we're at 21-minute mark. There you go.
Yeah.
Write it down.
Yeah, just cool. So we are trying to make this work, right? So it says the base models, controllers, and seed data have been provided for you. Should create and migrate our database before trying to make our solution. So I'm going to do Rails DB migrate real quick. I should like one day I'm going to buy a second screen so I don't have to be moving your faces around whenever I like am coding. But for now, if you like see my mouse doing weird stuff, that's what it's doing. So you remember the relationship I described earlier with like the little diagram? An artist has many songs. Now at this point, we could get really fancy with the spices and be like, hey, an artist has many notes through songs. This is not necessary though for the completion. And you could also be like, hey, has many genres through songs. This is not necessary for the lab. I'm actually going to comment it out now. We can decide to comment it in later. But remember that that's a thing we can now do. Genre, same thing right here. Just going to copy these. Is everyone comfortable with that? I can call those three things. Like when they're related in a database, like we just need a chain. We just need to change like or chain a bunch of has many's to like find out whatever we need to do. This eventually in relational databases, one thing to just know for later is that pinging a bunch of different databases is a kind of a costly, like time costly thing to do. So a lot of Rails efficiencies, a lot of the ways, like when people say Rails is slow, it's because it gives you a lot of tools to immediately be like, hey, has many notes through songs, through blah, 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 through blah, blah, blah. And then doesn't really, like, most people aren't really taught immediately, and it's not fully in the documentation, like, as like a here's the next step, how to like make those SQL joins into one query. Like, so basically, like SQL has a thing called inner join. Did you all remember learning about that? You have like those joins, right? Where you can just be like, hey, at the beginning, connect these two tables so I can go through all of them together, right? And that means that instead of being like, hey, I want to like go through every review of every post in this, you can just like merge them into one table, and then you only have to go through the table once. And that's like a lot of the efficiencies that eventually I would recommend digging into. Um, basically, there's this thing called the n+1 inefficiency, which becomes something that is an advanced concept that you can like dig into for a blog post, and I might like teach later, where it's basically imagining like I have 12 posts, and each of those posts have comments, right? Ideally, I want to just like the right way to do that is to merge the posts and reviews table so that like I can just go through every review and every post and like just query the database once or twice, right? An n+1 issue is that for each like post, I'm then querying the database like for each post, I'm then querying the database n times for each review, right? Rather than just once. So that's an interesting topic to talk about later. I'm definitely going to go over if I try to do both labs and keep talking about this, but I want to like bring that up. Cool. A note belongs to a song. Cool. I'm writing these right? Cool. And a song belongs to an artist, belongs to a genre, and has many notes. Cool. So at this point, we can now test this code out. So first off, I'm going to do Rails DB seed because it told me that they have a bunch of genres in the database. And now I can do like genre.all.pluck name, and that's just be like, hey, give me the names of all the genres. Oh, come on. I am not in Rails C. Classic. Embarrassing. Just read the error message, folks. Cool. So we got Britpop here. I'm going to like fully go into Britpop. That's going to be the theme here. Okay, there's also some weird ones. But we don't have to say that one out loud. Okay. Cool. So I'm going to now we can now see if we have an artist. New. Great. That shouldn't have an ID. Genre.new, should that have an ID? Like a foreign key? I'm going to say no because it doesn't have any. Whoops. Come on. And now we can try song.new. That does have foreign keys, right? So at this point, just to test this out, right? I can do artist.create, and we can do name. We can do Elastica or Blur. Blur or Oasis fans here? I would like if you had
Blur.
to choose. Cool. There we go. Genre.create, or genre doesn't need to be created. Genre.find by name. Britpop. Great. So G equals genre.name. Britpop. A equals, or A equals artist dot first. We're just testing this out. And then we can have, at this point we can do, oh, okay, now the British person takes off their camera once we start talking about blur. Turns on their camera. But cool. So we can be like, we can now do like a little S equals, and this is a little bit lazy. Usually I would like write song here. We're not writing in Go. So, but now we can do Park Life.
Oh, Park
What do you want to do?
Coffee and TV.
Oh, that's also good. Cool. And now we can do artist ID A dot ID, right? Genre ID G dot ID, right? Then we can do S dot save. And now, because we've got notes, we're just testing this one. It's S or S dot notes dot build. We can see that we need content here, right? So I would do like S dot notes dot create content. Good vibes. I don't know. I think that's like one of their chiller songs. Cool. And now we can see like, hey, S dot artist. We can do S dot notes. We get an array. We can do like dot pluck content. Cool. We created two notes. Interesting. Oh right, one of them is ID nil. Come on. But then because we just, that's actually confusing to me that it's like pulling that. Because that was not created. I'm actually now very curious. Cool, and now it's gone. So I guess like it was doing a collection and it was querying stuff in our local like IRB or our local Rails console, which is interesting that it had access to that. So I just learned a whole new thing about Rails, right? And we can do like song.first.genre and it's Britpop. Cool. What we can't do yet, because I haven't added these associations, but we can try. We can now try to comment this out, right? I'm now going to do like, I'm now going to test this part because why not? Artist.first.genre. And you'll see that now has Britpop once we add these like has many's, right? And we can do that the other way too if we want to. I don't think we need to like have a note like track like, hey, good vibes belongs to Britpop. Like maybe, but that's probably not very helpful for right here. And we can start digging into other things. But at this point, we can pull this README back. So cool. We now have the relationships working the way they asked us to, right?
If we have a belongs to, do we necessarily need to have a has many on the other side, right?
Let's take a look. So you have this note dot first, right? And now if I call dot song, remember it still works. And the reason is because this is basically just writing this method for us. Like def song and song dot find and then self dot song ID, right? We don't necessarily need the other side of the relationship for that. There will be times like a has many through, I believe definitely does require that has many. We can test that out. Or whoops. If I commented this out, right? If I did genre dot find by name Britpop dot artists. suddenly this breaks because it calls on this has many songs model in order to make the has many artists model. And if you remember from my lecture yesterday, like in the presentation, I would be like, hey, this code uses the previous code, right? Whenever we had the has many through, like we have to call songs dot like map, right? And then map them into artists, right? So like the way that we would write that is like def artists end self dot songs dot map song song dot artist, right? Or more specifically, artist dot find song dot artist ID, right? And that's what transforms our songs into artists, right? But calling dot songs, this is something that this gives us. So we can't use this, like we can't use these has many without first adding this. But in the other case, when it's just a belongs to, it doesn't need the has many because that's not a method that it necessarily needs. Cool. How do we feel about that?
That was very clear. Thank you.
Great. So let's test this out. So now we need to create a form, right? For a song. And that's the basic thing from this for this. We currently have a text field. At this point, I'm going to type Rails S. Let's take a look. So we currently have this like little this little form. It just creates a song by title. We know that we need for a song a title, an artist ID, and a genre ID, right? And an artist just needs a name, right? So our goal here is to create a form that when we create a title, when we create a song, also creates the artist as well. And then gives us like, and also finds the genre. So the first thing is we got to create an artist, right? So let me take a look at the like learn.co or like run learn so that we see where we're like our goals are. But for this, I'm earnestly going to be doing my best to like just code this around so that it's so we've got to create a song with an artist, but I'm just gonna like try to develop it like to the requirements that I imagine it needs, like based on like what their description, like here's how I imagine this code should work. And then at the end, I'm just gonna like make sure that like the IDs are right so that Capybara can pick it up, which is the test suite that they're using. But the first thing is it creates a song with an artist, right? So at this point, we have this, we can like start doing some cool things. One of which is we can take in a string that represents an artist. But we can like basically what I'm going to show you is like I'm going to try to create an artist using the artist name parameter from this form, right? So like usually you can't do that, right? Like usually if I were to be like if I were to like create a form, right? If I were to do like a collection select, I would have to use an existing artist. And then like I would have to create the artist for first and then create the song. In this way, we're trying to make creating a song, an artist part of creating a song. And that's something we can play around with in the models. I'm going to show you how we do that. So we're going to start with just doing this. And then we'll hop back to like doing the rest of the code. First, I just want to test. I think I can create a song with just a title. Park Life. Great. I'm going to not do that. I'm going to destroy it. Last.destroy. But we can start building these attributes out one by one and then testing them to make sure they work, rather than like having to do this all at once. So I created this text field that I'm using an ID called artist name rather than artist. Now this is, I think, going to give me an error right off the bat because we currently don't have an artist name method. I'm going to show you. Right? There's no artist name method for song, right? I can solve this error right away by creating like this def artist name. Cheese. And this will solve this error for me, but be unhelpful. So instead, I'm going to be like, ideally, I want to be like, hey, if it has an artist with a name, use that. Otherwise, just don't do anything. So I'm going to have like artist question mark or artist and artist dot name, right? So this will either return false, in which case it will just give me nil in the thing and not cause an error, or if I have an artist with a name, it'll return that artist's name. Let's test this out. So if I were to instead do like now if I were to give the artist a name first, right? So I can prove this. If I were to be like at song.artist equals artist.first, take a look. Now blur fills in, right? Because we just gave it that information. But otherwise, it's like, so in this case, we're being like, oh, it does have an artist with a name, so I'm going to yield artist name. In the other case where it doesn't have an artist, it's going to just yield false and then put nothing in my form.
How does it know what artist is if you're not defining it anywhere?
We are defining it right here. When we say belongs to artist, we're creating a method called def artist, right?
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So this is short for self.artist, right?
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So at this point, we can now start doing the magic, right? Because currently, I'm just going to put a bybug right here. If I were to be like, if I were to do Park Life by Blur, right? If I create song. In this bybug, we have this params, right? And in this params, we have artist name, right? Params song artist name, right? But if I were to be like, hey, params dot require song dot permit title artist name, I'm going to call this strong params. This is useful right now, and in fact, I'm going to like just update our strong params to have artist name. And at this point, though, I can't call song.create with strong params and get the artist to work, right? It doesn't know what artist name is as a setter method. We have this artist name method right here, but this is a getter method, and right now it's like, hey, I can't create something with an artist name, right? Active record will be like, oh, if you gave me an artist, I would be able to create it. If I were to now create a setter method though that does this for me, I can start using this. And that's, do you remember setter methods versus getter methods? So now I'm saying, hey, active record, there is an artist name equals thing you can do for song right here. And this can be like puts I am a Britpop boy, right? And this will probably do something terrible and crash things, but let's check it out. And then we can do like, and it says I'm a Britpop boy and then does nothing, right? But ideally, we now want to be like, we can now do something like this, right? So we can do like artist.find or create by name equals name. So do you know what the find or create by method does? Basically, it says, hey, I'm looking for this name in the database. If it doesn't exist, just create it and set it and like then I'm being like and set that equal to artist. And now I can be like self.artist equals artist, right? And this is just me being like, hey, this artist is now going that I just found or created is going to be the one that we're using. So this is defining a custom setter method. It's a really cool thing that you can do in Rails. And I'm going to show you that it works. If I do this, and I now run this, you will see an artist ID of nil. Come on. Give me 1 second here to make sure that I'm doing this right.
You didn't save it.
Classic. Great. And so now that works, right? That artist was created when like I used find or create by. Now find or create by isn't always going to be the thing that you want to use. If you're creating if you're using this to create a belongs to, the belongs to is going to wait for the for like a song to be created here. So like if like an artist belongs to a song, it'll be like, whoa, I can't find or create this because I can't create this because currently its parent doesn't exist. And you don't want to find or create by anyways, because like a find means that like it would already exist in the database and probably already belong to something else. But so in that case, you would be like using a build here or something like that. And you would start building it and setting that up. On this side, though, we can use a find or create by. On this side of it has many through. Now, does anyone know why I didn't just call this artist equals? Let's try this out.
Isn't that a method already given to us by the belongs to relationship?
Yes. So in this case, right, if I were to do artist right here, if I were to go like all the way through this and go back to my view, I were to just be like, hey, this is artist. Let's take a look at what happens. Exit. Cool. Go back here. Go ahead and hit a create. Now we're back in this by bug, and I'm going to just call this. Oh, right. Something was not saved here. Oh, right, because I didn't refresh this. Let's just exit this. If I try this again, you now see that I have this infinite loop that suddenly crashes everything. That's because artist is being used for a couple of different things. So that's why when you see like it be like, why do I have to call this artist name rather than artist? It's because they like in the tests, it's because they want to stop you from doing like creating an infinite loop. So by like defining it as something different, we can start using it safely. Loop. Great. Let's take a look. Great. Isn't mad at me still. Computers don't like it when you give them an infinite loop. They just stare at you for a while and take a while to load your Rails app after that. I'm gonna kill my Rails app. Yep, everything. This is frozen. I'm getting a big whir from my computer. So this is why we don't we don't create infinite loops by using an artist setter method that isn't custom. Let's close terminal, exit, Rails S. Awesome. Cool. Try this one more time. And there we go. Cool. Park life by blur. Hit this by bug. And with this new custom setter method, right? I now have it. So like when I feed, okay, this is the important part, right? This songs controller now, by using this parameter called artist name, is passing in to my song.new this thing called artist name, which before we defined it, it would be like, I have no idea what to do with it. Now it's like, oh, there's a custom setter method you gave me. I can now use this, right? And when I use this, I'm going to call your custom setter method model. And what that does is it's like, hey, I'm going to find or create this artist, and then I'm going to set the artist for the song equal to the artist that I just found or created. It's a very cool thing that Rails does. So now if I run this, it'll work, and we have an artist ID. Cool. Do we all see how that worked? Great. The next thing I'm going to do is we have to do a genre, right? A selection box for genre. Users should be able to pick amongst existing genres only. What do we feel like this could have?
Collection select?
Yeah, that seems like a good idea, right? Like this is like, hey, make a user pick from a list of genres. We've got a collection select. And we spent a long time talking about collection select yesterday. Left side of collection select deals with the key. Right side deals with the value. We're going to do genre ID, right? Let's do a label. F.label. Genre, comma, genre.all. And now I'm going to use the genre's ID to be like, hey, this is the value I want to pass across, and I'm going to use a name. I believe that this is the right way to do it. I do still look this up often. But basically what I'm saying here is I want a key of genre ID to come across in my params. I want it to be set equal to the value of the ID that they chose, but I want them to choose from a list of names and then use that ID, right? And remember, a genre ID is all we need to set up this relationship between song and genre, right? So in this case, we're not going to have to do a custom setter method at all. It knows what to do with the genre ID because that's straight up an attribute. We all cool with this? So we can now refresh this page. Am I still in a buy bug? Exit. And now we have a dropdown. I'm going to add some breaks. Them's the breaks right there, the BR tags. Cool. And now I can like scroll down to Britpop, and I can now start. Should we do All Right by, is that Supergrass? Maybe. We can now test this out. And here we are. Now we have nothing because of what?
We need to update the permitted params.
That's right, because it currently says unpermitted parameter genre ID. Cool. We just permitted it. And we can exit spy bug. All right. By Supergrass. I really hope I'm right on that. Otherwise, I'll have shamed myself. And Kyle's going to type in the chat whether I'm right or wrong. But here we can now do this. And now I can call this. And we can make some, we now have some song params here, right? So this is actually a good song. We can save it, but unfortunately it doesn't have any notes, and that's going to be the last part of this, right? So this is where the lab did something a little bit weird, right?
Wait, so it's saved even though it doesn't have an ID? Am I missing something?
No, we haven't saved it yet, but we could if we
Oh,
wanted to. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no,
Disregard
totally.
me.
Because the other side, we don't have to give it any notes, right? That's an optional thing it has, right? So for this next one, the lab says something a little bit weird. It passes these in as an array, right? So basically, I'm going to show you what that looks like. And then we will remember how to make it pass the labs. But first, maybe I should just like run learn, see where we are. Thank you, Kyle. I will rest easier. Cool. So we can now run learn and just be like, hey, what do I still have remaining? See if I've been like keeping up with their tests. And I have a buy bug. Foolish. Learn will also hit your buy bugs. It is not immune. Great, but now because it hit my buy bug, it was like, cool, I didn't run the R specs. You did a great job. Great, we'll try that again. Cool. So the one thing we still have remaining is notes, right? So at this point, I'm just going to create a bunch of input fields, right? That are just going to be custom. So I'm not going to use the form builder at all. I'll be like f.label notes, and I'll do like a little break, but then and there are like 400 billion different ways to write a break tag, that all of which are very like different depending on what's going on. React is very specific, Rails is way less specific, so I'm just always lost on how I'm going to write it. But at this point, because I'm not using the form builder, I'm just going to make an input field right here, and we'll give it a type equal to text, and I'm going to give it a name, and I'm just going to manually nest these params, right? And then this little thing right here says, hey, and make an array out of everything that looks like this. This is a Rails trick, right? And it was discussed in the lab before this. By adding this little bracket here, then if I add multiple, I'm just going to let the capybara know what's up. I'm not sure if this is the way they want me to do it, but it says like, hey, I need to be able to find something called song notes one. So I'm like just doing that manually. Do that.
So the literal name doesn't have to be song_notes_1.
Nope. This will basically, we're just trying to nest this under an array. And I think if I did this, it will create 4 different things for me, which isn't necessarily what I want, right? So I'm going to test this, make sure that I've got the code right. Oops. Bloop. Cool. I'm going to add some breaks, but this currently now looks like some sort of input field. Cool. At this point, I'm going to give Oasis some respect. Okay, cool. And at that point, something just happened there because I accidentally hit enter instead of just switching to the next field. Let's try that one again. And I'm also going to create a buy bug right here, so we can go back to using one. Right. Vaguely overture. Discordant. Good opening track to What's the Story Morning Glory works well in concerts. Great. So at this point, we just hit the spy bug again, right? And now in params, right? You're going to see this array, right? That's going to be called song notes that we can start to access by doing song notes. And this is awesome, but I can't unfortunately just like write params that require song dot permit title artist name song notes, right? Because at this point it's going to be like, hey, song notes is an array, and you're like, if someone's trying to pass you an array instead of a value and you're not expecting it, that might be really bad. So it's trying to like really be protective of me. So first off, I'm going to add genre ID because I forgot that. And then the way I'm going to tell it, like, hey, actually, song notes is an array. And this is the way we do that. And then it'll be like, cool, here's a bunch of things that we can use as song notes. Now, if I were to, I now can't just create a song with song notes. It's not going to like give me that. It'll be like, whoa, we don't know what song notes is. So this is another case we're going to have to write a custom setter method, right? We can write this the same way we wrote last one, except in this case, we're doing a belongs to. Notes. At this point, like we have these notes, right, that we eventually want to like do note.create content equals note, right? Or something like that. But note requires an existing song in the database to exist. It has a belongs to song. So we're going to need the song to exist in the database before we can save it. So right now, calling note.create is not going to work. Like I can't do notes.each do note. This will break. And I could show you it breaking, but basically it's going to be like, or I can't do like self.notes.create this, because in this case, or let's make this. Yeah, sure. This will probably get weird. Let's do contents. So at this, I think that will still work, but this right here, if I call self.notes.create content note, in the process of creating my own song, it's going to break because it's going to be like, cool, I'm going to totally create this note and I'm going to set its content equal to note. I'm going to set its ID equal to your ID. Thank you so much, song. Wait a second, you don't have an ID, and then it's going to break. So we're going to get an error there. The way we get around that is instead we can just do, hey, self.notes.build content equals note, right? And then when the song saves, so will all of the notes, right? And I'm actually going to like go one step further. I'm going to be like, hey, self.note, or wait, note, unless note equals empty string, do this end. Because remember, I have a bunch of empty forms, and I'm not going to always have 4 notes on a song. Not every song can be as notable as Oasis's Hello, right? So, so this is going to just be a way that I can be like, hey, build it if there's something under note, right? And we can now test this out, see if this works.
What was the difference between build and create? I don't recall build.
Yeah, build is like new. It doesn't save into the database. Build just forms it, but it doesn't try to ping the database with it until like someone calls .save on it. Does that make sense?
So it's like new?
Yeah. And it's the one we use when we're like building something for, I'm actually not sure if like new will work here, but build is like generally like, hey, we're building an associated element that will then be saved. And this is how they do it in the document in like our learn. We can try it out to see if like, hey, notes works. But we'll try this out first and then we'll see. Exit. We'll try this one more time. Hit the buy bug. At song. At song.save. And now, let's see if this works. Did I forget? Did I comment this out? Shameful. Cool. Let me check something, because at this point I'm going to have to do a little debugging. Did I forget to like make this parameter in here? Yeah, I did. Great. Great. Now we can test this out. Boom. And at this point, you'll now see, hey, this didn't just create a song, it also created 4 notes, right? And if I call at song.notes, I now have 4 different notes, and I can pluck content, and we've got these 4 notes. Cool? The way that works is I passed in an array of song notes. I told song how to handle those song notes by iterating through them and then building like these notes that will then go into the database as associated with song with the content of note. Do you see how we did that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
We can like not use build, right? And it would still be fine. Like I know it works without using build.
Like .new?
No, like .create.
Let's take a look.
Like I know it works, but like, is there a reason we should use create or
I'm
build
actually skeptical that it works. I might be wrong on this, but let's take a look about why. You cannot call create unless the parent is saved. That's why I'm using build
Yeah.
here.
Well, okay, so yes, that is true. But if you do like note is equal to note.create with content and then shovel in the note into self.notes.
Oh, so you're doing like,
yeah, and then set that as a variable. And then self.notes.
yeah,
Shovel in note.
this should work.
Well,
and
without the unless though. I didn't do that part, but I don't know if that makes a difference.
That's not going to change anything. That's just for the empty fields.
Okay.
Right?
No.
N, right? Yeah, there we go. And I'm going to talk about why we can do this. This will work.
Because I don't think they had brought up build at this point.
Yeah. The reason I'm not doing this is because this, in this case, right, we risk a note getting created and then a song not being created. And in that case, like I want to create the songs first because I don't want notes with empty like information in our database. So like there's like I might eventually hit a validation on song. So if I go like, hey, let's test this out. I might be wrong here. But validates song presence true, right? Here, if I start doing this, right? Oh, did I do validates title? Try this one more time. squirrel, dogs, right? You're going to now see that note.last is dogs. Dogs is there without any song ID, right? And that eventually could break our database. So by doing this build instead, we wait until the song's created to make it work. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. So I guess my question would be, if they had never showed us build, like, were we just supposed to like pull that out of like, you know?
I am unsure.
Because they do present us build like a lab or two later.
Mm-hmm.
But by this point, they had not brought up build, and the test pass when you write it with the create.
Yeah, I went all over the place with this. I ended up with accepts nested attributes 4 on this.
Interesting.
Into that rabbit hole, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
I'll be ashamed, but I'm just going to tell you, when I got down to the notes, I just put content equals great piano and content equals
Nope. We like that.
cosmology, so that it passed. I'm just like, I'm done with this. It worked, like, from what I could do, but yeah, I don't know why I couldn't finish my solution. I was like, that's what the test wants. That's what the test gets.
Yeah. So this currently passes the tests. But also, I forget where I put the tests. Wow, this is bad that I forgot that. Test. Boop, boop, boop. This is shameful.
Well, are you looking for the learn tests?
Yeah.
They're at the bottom, where it's a spec. No, up.
There we go. Cool. That's what I'm looking for. Remember, the easiest way to pass any learn test is to delete these.
Aside from that, though.
Yeah. Aside from that, yeah, this was a lot of like this particular lab was like one of the reasons I wanted to review it was because there was so much material that like we only vaguely covered or didn't really cover at all before you were asked to do this lab. And like there was a lot of Googling that it expected you to do. And it like even like says that in the README, it's like, hey, you're gonna have to do a lot of Googling to make this work. And that's annoying. Oh, and here's where it says like put in these IDs. Rather than just like ignoring that. But this is how it works. Do you have any questions about how we did this? Or any questions in general, Ruth?
Yeah, I guess my only question is like if we come across a lab where like they're asking us to use something that we like clearly have no idea what it could be, do we just delete the test and call it good? Like,
in that case, like I spend some time, see if you can Google it yourself. Because like that's how real like developers solve it. It's like eventually it's just like, ooh, I don't know how to do this, and then I'll Google. But if you find like, hey, I have no idea how to do this, and I've been bashing my head against it for a while, you can skip it and then come back to it if you like learn more stuff. If you get into like the class, like learn something about it in class, and I'll try to make sure that like I'm keeping up with like the material and see if like, hey, if there's something that you're being taught in the like being expected to do in the labs that you don't know, I'm going to try to find a way to teach it at some point during class.
So how do we know when it's wrong? So like I had no idea that doing a create and shoveling a note was going to like not make it right, even though it passed the test. Like, are we learning things that are wrong?
No, I'd like, but you like at this point you end up in a situation where you're like, hey, I tried this, it worked. It might create bugs later. But like at a certain point, like as a developer, like getting into the process of being like, hey, that dot create is going to like maybe sometimes make this ID wrong. It's something for you to spot, and something as a developer, like you've learned the material to be like, oh, hey, this ID isn't ending up in the database or shouldn't end up, or like will sometimes not end up in the database. And then just to think about that. And if you're thinking about this, if you know how it's working under the hood, then like that matters way more than being like, in this case, I know that to use builds like is the correct way to do it. Because I will forget build next time I come around to this module to teach someone about Rails. But I won't forget like how databases work and how Rails works under the hood.
Okay.
So
Nikki,
yeah, go ahead.
I have a question on, so I'm behind on the lecture, so maybe this will be covered. I haven't actually done this lab. So how is song nodes, def song nodes equals related to the params that you're permitting? So can you go to the params that you're permitting? Can you go? Yeah. So is that song nodes at the end? Is that calling on that method, or what? How is it related?
That's exactly. So remember what this params.permit does for us. I'm gonna throw in a bybug right here. Again, and let's take a little refresh. Cool. Let's do Who Wants to Live Forever. Queen. Cool. Let's do great for mournful montages about being the Highlander. Right? And we can hit this create right here. I'm going to go back to my bybug. And remember that song params? This is a really fancy way to write a hash. I can write to hash on this. And this just gives me a hash, right? That I'm then using to call song.new, right? Like a params is a hash with a few extra security features. So it's a hash that also keeps track of what's being permitted and what's not, right? That's all that active action controller parameters is. It's a fancy way to store a hash that has a little bit of extra stuff, right? And once I permit everything, I can call toHash to just translate it into a hash. And when song.new gets params, it's translating it into title, this, artist name, this, genre ID, this, song notes equals this. And it's passing those all into the .new method, right? So active record gives us a few of those .new methods by like being like, oh, this is associated with our database. But also, we also created something that's like artist name equals, right? That's going to just know how to take in a key of artist name a key of artist name and then do something with it, right? So in this case, we are passing in song notes, right? Which is something that active record doesn't know about. It doesn't know like, hey, there's something in the database called song notes. But we've told the model, hey, if someone tries to set our song notes equal to something, which is what .new is doing under the hood, right? It's going to pass in a bunch of contents and then build a bunch of notes on it. And we can use this outside of the params context. So I'll be like song.last, right? And I can say, hey, song.last.song notes equals like, and then do like a little hash right here and be like Batman cheese. And this might not actually work because at this point there's nothing here to say to save. So Ruth, this is another case where create versus build are going to do different things. But now if I do this, nothing happens because we just built it, but we can still use that method with a dot equals.
So basically, if I'm not getting this wrong, please correct me. So by using active record, we're getting all these default methods on song, like song.name, song.whatever columns our table has, and those are built into active record. If we want something more specific like artist name, then we need to build it. And that's what we're calling on when we're using the params. It's just that I forgot that we were using active record and that active record was defining these methods for us. But it's really exactly the same logic, except that these ones are so unique that we need to define them as opposed to active record just doing the default for us.
Yeah.
Is that it? Okay.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And I said,
and then
go ahead. You go first.
So I want to follow up on Ruth's question. Well, it's kind of similar, but what are the best practices that we can follow on how to create things so that we don't eventually break our database? Is there something like, okay, when you create something, you first need to find who the parent is and then only create it from the parents, or what are the rules to build something like that? We have something like that for creating routes, the RESTful thing. Is there something like that to create things in our database?
So we're now entering the point where the best practices aren't like really like the methods that we write, but instead how they interface with our database. So in your mind, as like someone who is building a piece of code or like a relation to a database, you have to ask, if I like store things with nil values in the database, will that break my code later on? If that will, then I should probably make my code so it doesn't get saved in the database until it has that ID. And that's why I used build here rather than create, right? I didn't want like something in our database because eventually I might want to be like, hey, let's have an index of notes that all relate to those songs, right? If I know I'm not going to have that, if I know I will only be calling notes by calling song.notes, then I can totally start saving some random like nil information into our database. But if I know that like maybe at one point I want to go backwards from a note to a song and maybe have an index of notes, that might be a situation where I'm going to start calling note.song and then having code break. And so instead, I'm going to be like preserving my database. So the best practice is to say, hey, is this going to break my database? And then be like, no or yes. And if it's going to break your database, probably think of a way around that, probably code something a little bit more advanced. But there's no like individual method that I'm going to tell you this is the best practice way to do it.
And how do I know at this point, you tell me like, just think if it's going to break your database. I'm not at the point where I know what breaks my database. So how do I know what breaks my database? Yeah.
My like big rule for what breaks your database is data that is not the data you would expect, right? So
Okay.
if I'm taking in, like you'll remember that at a certain point, right? If I like create a note, like note.create content cheese, right? And now I can call note.last, right? And now if I were to like be rendering this note out into the browser, you'll notice that the song ID is nil. So then if I were to be like, I would probably be like 2 months later, like on this development of like this beautiful like playlist like app that allows me to rate Britpop songs. I'm finally like adding this notes feature that looks through notes. And I'm going to be like, cool, I'm going to iterate through all my notes and I'm going to like look at the songs associated with them and then I'm going to show their titles, right? And I'll be like, hey, note.last.song.name. And that's just going to be a piece of code that I'm going to like write. And suddenly it throws an error at me. And then I'll be like, oh no, I've saved a bunch of things with nil attributes in my database. And now I have to write new code to be like, okay, if the note doesn't have a song, don't show it. And then like I start having to code around a bad database. So like usually nil values are a great example of things that you probably don't want to store in your database unless you know what you're doing. That happens all the time though in production level code. There's tons of databases with a lot of nil values. You start coding around it, but it's something to avoid if you can.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I said that we might get into the second lab. I think that given that we're 30 minutes over, I might save that for another time. Glad to do another curriculum pod to cover that if that's something people really want to dive into though. Do you want to? Cool. Do you want to today or Monday?
Either works for me.
Works for me.
Do we really just want to
And-
like dive into the second one? Will that make? I think we can probably knock it out in 30, 40 minutes.
Let's just get it over with.
Cool. Okay. I'm going to stop this recording and then I'm going to create another one.
Okay.
But that's Kirsten, my girlfriend.
As a break, waving.
So at this point, I'm going to stop this recording and maybe create another one. Boop, boop.